Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Sergio Lira. I'm the president of the Greater Houston LULAC Council 4967, also vice president of the Texas Multicultural Advocacy Coalition. I am honored to be here today. I'm honored to see those of you who are here in person and those of you who are online to listen and participate in this very, very important topic. We'll have officials from the FBI office, Department of Justice, and folks from the Asian American community to discuss a very, very important conversation. So let's sit back and enjoy this event. Thank you. And now I'd like to present Mr. Paul Cherukuri, Rice University Innovation Officer. Please come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us today. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you here to Rice. We clearly have shown you Texas weather, and I think you've got a good flavor of that. This is as worse as it gets, so please come back. I think we have better weather waiting for you in another week, I think, and you can come test that. So please try that out. But it really is a pleasure to have you here. I'd first like to thank the FBI leadership and our distinguished representatives from both the academic and Asian American communities for joining us today. This is a very important dialogue. It's important that we are gathering here today to discuss this. We are honored to host the leadership from FBI headquarters in DC and the Houston field office, Jill Murphy, Kelly Choi, and Gigi Pickering, as well as, who I will introduce momentarily, as well as many other leaders here. I understand these type of conversations can present several risks for both the FBI and members of the Asian American community. They can be challenging topics, challenging conversations, but they are critically important to ensuring research security, policy that would protect both science and the scientists conducting their work. This is an important topic that is actually very close to not only our operations, but the mission of this university. And so we're glad to host you here today. In addition to that, it should go without saying, but I will say it anyway, especially to this group, that Asian Americans are absolutely vital to the success and competitiveness of the U.S. research and innovation enterprise and ecosystem. And not just scientists, but also the communities that support them. Our system has benefited enormously from immigrant researchers and their families, in particular since the first U.S.-China Science and Technology Cooperative Agreement was signed in 1979. The growing number of Chinese students and researchers working in the United States continues to accelerate scientific discovery and drive innovation at blazing levels, incredible speeds. The role of the federal government and its legal system is to protect the U.S. innovation ecosystem. That is one of the primary functions. Research security policy and its implementation requires an appropriate balance between prompting longstanding and fruitful international collaborations and mitigating risks. Changes to openness of the U.S. and innovation ecosystem, especially at academic institutions, could harm the ecosystem. And so we must be very deliberate, very careful, and balance is the right word. And this is something that we need to get right. And so this conversation, I think, will lead to much of that. Today, we hope to foster a dialogue between the Bureau and members of the academic and Asian American communities. We hope this forum will serve as a first step toward building a regular channel of communications between both of these groups. And we hope the panel will provide clarity on the changing landscape of national research security policy and its implementation. We've got an outstanding group here of speakers that can speak with authority on this critical issue. And I think we are all aware of the caliber of individuals here, but before I introduce our panel, I'd like to recognize a few individuals joining us today. First, Representative Jean Wu, who has proudly served the people of District 137 here in Harris County in the Texas House for over 12 years. Thank you for being here. There he is right back there. Thank you. I'd also like to thank U.S. Attorney, I'm going to probably not say this right, Alamadar Hamdani. Where are you at? Are you here? Oh, there you are. Of course, I'm sorry for attending as well. And Attorney Hamdani is Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the Southern District of Texas, and he will give some brief remarks after our panel. So let me introduce some of our speakers today. Just briefly, I'm just going to list the names as well as their roles and titles at their various organizations. So if you could just wave your hand or raise your hand as I call your name so that everybody knows who you are. Jill Murphy, Deputy Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI. Thank you. Kelly Choi, Supervisory Special Agent, FBI Houston Field Office. Georgette Pickering, Gigi, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, FBI Houston Field Office. Thank you. Gordon Kwan, Managing Partner and Co-Founder of Kwan Law Group, PLLC, former Houston City Council member. There we go. David Donati, Senior Staff Attorney, American Civil Liberties Union of Texas. Thank you. Gisela Perez Kusakawa. Did I get that right? Hopefully. There we go. There she is. And she is the Executive Director of the Asian American Scholar Forum. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Stephen Pei, Professor of Electrical Engineering and member of the University of Houston. And the panel will be followed by closing remarks from Neal Lane, Senior Fellow with the Science Technology Policy Program at the Baker Institute. Neal, please, if you would raise your hand. Not that everyone here knows you, I'm sure. And Doug Williams, Special Agent in Charge at the FBI Field Office as well, and he's a U.S. Attorney Hamdani. So with that introduction to speakers, we are going to get started, and I'm going to pass it off to, if you would come up, please, to make a few.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will say you stole some of my opening remarks. Yeah.
I apologize.
No, it just means we're in agreement. Hey, so just one comment on the weather, because I did live in Austin for a little bit, for about 4 years. And when I moved down there from Washington, D.C., someone had told me before I got there that it wasn't humid in Austin. And I got there and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it is humid in Austin. They said, well, not as humid as Texas, as Houston. And I was like, was that the bar? Because it is much more humid here than it is in Austin. Look, first, I want to start out by thanking you guys for inviting me to come down and join this important discussion from Washington, D.C. I'm grateful to be here today. And I wanted to start out by saying that I know that some of the actions that have happened in the past have had a negative impact on this community. And that certainly was not the intent. The intent of some of the things that we've done in the past was purely to stop the transfer of technology that's incentivized by the government of China, and not to dampen the scientific work and the collaboration that I think makes the world a better place. And I think you hit this on your remarks to begin with. We certainly stand for scientific collaboration. And we definitely think that those things make our world a better place. So it is not to dampen that space at all. But we do want a level playing field. We want a fair competition, and we don't want a hidden hand of the CCP getting second mover advantage on investments that the U.S. government's making. And so our goal at the FBI is to protect the communities that we live in and that we're here to serve. And we can always learn and be better. And I think that's something we're constantly trying to do. And the FBI values its relationships with this community. And we can't protect this community or the great work that they do if we don't have your trust. And I think that's one of the reasons that I came down here today, is because I want you to know that this partnership, this relationship is really important to the FBI. We need to strive to continue to learn and listen more. Like, our job is truly to protect our country and the people that live here. And that's all the people that live here. And we're full of dedicated people that care about our country and this community. But to protect this community, we really need to spend time listening to you and your concerns, and we're not always right, and we can always be better. We need open lines of communication. I think that's really important. So when there's disagreements, we can have honest conversations. We value your opinions and ideas, and more importantly, we value your criticisms. It makes us better, right? And so I really look forward to the conversation that we'll have today, and I really look forward to the conversation that we continue to have into the future. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Pei.
Thank you, Jill. I want to begin by thanking everyone here and online to attend this very unusual forum. It is open to participants across the country via the Zoom. So this is really very unusual. Many of you are old friends, I know many years, and many of them I've met just in the past few months because of this event. So I would like to thank the Baker Institute Science and Technology Policy Program, in particular, Candice. Where are you, Candice? Candice Evans, and also, of course, Neal. I'm saying without them, this event would not happen here. I think they have tremendous contribution to this effort. And of course, the Rice University Office of Innovation, and Paul is here, and thank you very much. Their collaboration with him at the Texas Multicultural Advocacy Coalition, I think we have our Vice President, Sergio Lira, and also the Secretary Willie here. And also, I think on the screen, we have two of my APA Justice co-workers, Jeremy Wu and Vincent Wang. They are running the Zoom from Maryland and Ohio. So thank you, Jeremy and Vincent. And special thanks goes to Tian Dao, the Assistant Vice President of Research Security and the Office of Research. I think with their support, I think a lot of things will not happen. We have the people here, and also we have over 400 people sign up to attend through the Zoom. So they include people from the East to West Coast, scientists, students, and also people from all ethnic group and the community. I think they're all here listen to us. Today's forum may not happen without State Representative Jin Wu. He was the one introducing the FBI and me together. I think that was really triggered the whole event to bring us all together here today. Before we begin, it's important for our audience to hear how this forum comes about. I think this is a journal we went through. So let me start with this Supervisory Special Agent Choi. Would you please share with our audience a little background of how do we get here?
Well, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Choi. I'm a Supervisory Special Agent with the FBI, and it is an honor to be here with you today. So thank you, Dr. Pei, for that very important question, because today's conversation has been years in the making. And as the FBI, we are thrilled that we are here today and have this opportunity. FBI Houston specifically is aware that there has been apprehension in the AAPI community for the community. Oh, yes. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yes. I am also from the East Coast, so I have a very loud voice if necessary. So as I was saying, we are aware as FBI Houston that there is apprehension in the AAPI community. And we want to address that because, as Ms. Murphy said, we cannot do our jobs without the community's support. And this is predating back to almost 4 years ago. This apprehension became very apparent in 2020 when the United States State Department ordered the closing of the People's Republic of China consulate located here in Houston. As part of the closing, the FBI was charged with conducting routine interviews within the community. However, when we were conducting those interviews, we knew that the community was not comfortable talking to us. And so we have spent the past several years in a one-on-one effort and in a grassroots effort in working with community leaders such as Professor Pei and people who are represented here in this room and online to help us encourage how can we improve the dialogue with the community and the communities that we serve. And one of the suggestions that came out of that was this panel forum that we are having here today. Our goal truly is to hear from the AAPI community and understand what concerns or impediments that may exist that would prevent you from wanting to talk to and reach out to either federal law enforcement such as the FBI or our local and state partners. If there is misplaced trust, we want to lay the groundwork to rebuild that public trust. Public trust is critical to the mission of the FBI. And most importantly, we want to create a safe space for the AAPI community to reach out to law enforcement, to report crimes that are being committed either to federally, FBI, or to your local and state authorities, because protecting and serving the American people is our mission. And those are our three simple, very simple goals for today. We hope that this conversation is one of many to come, and that is what has brought us all together in this room. So thank you very much.
Gordon, since you were elected to the city council in Houston, you have been the person that the community go to when we want to interact with the law enforcement in Houston. Okay. I think that also you were one of the panelists in the 2018, the Forum on the Impact of Economic Espionage Investigation on the Asian American Community. So that was the first encounter we had with the Houston field office. But 5 years passed. So what has been changed? And what you see can be changed to improve, to make the future better?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Pei. Can you hear me okay? All right.
Yes.
You know, sadly, in my opinion, we have not had a lot of follow-up from that discussion. It was a great discussion in 2018. There was a lot of questions going on because there were various Asian researchers who were under investigation and very celebrated cases. And I agree that it's important to set that relationship between the FBI and the community. I think that oftentimes the community is somewhat intimidated, maybe rightly so. When you say FBI, you're like, oh, am I in trouble? And I think that the FBI, to do their job, needs to really have a neighborhood kind of relationship whereby we feel like there is trust. What Paul had said about balance, I think, is very important. I know they have a job to do, and certainly national security is a very important portion. Christopher Wray has already said that really China is our biggest threat in the long term. So we know that a lot of people have their eyes on China. I think China is being used as a political ploy in many ways, as the boogeyman. I don't know if everything's justified, but I think that we have in our community a number of, I would say, patriots who care deeply about the United States and would want to help if they find anything wrong. But who do they go to? What relationship do they have? And I know we're going to talk about this later on, but I think that there are a number of community organizations we have in our Asian community that we can get the FBI involved with. You know, I know this sounds simplistic, but just having meals with them, coming to our occasions, knowing agents, having their card, and when we see something that we think is questionable, we know who to go to. And I don't think that connection has been made. I think there was a great effort in 2018, but I haven't seen much change. I know that actually in the last 6 years, we have a very different kind of espionage situation. Cybersecurity seems to be the big area. It's not so much of me passing secrets to Neal or to somebody, but checking on what research is being done and how do you protect that. Hacking is obviously a big problem, but I think researchers know the difference of what is correct and what's not. And creating that relationship is vital. So let me just say, I think we had a good first step. I don't see a second or third step having been developed at that time. Hopefully this will ignite those procedures in the future.
Thank you, Gordon and Kelly. Can you hear me? Good. I think anything that the special agent and also I think Gigi, you want to comment on?
Well, I have nothing to add to his commentary at this. I have nothing to add at this point yet, sir.
I think I can add, hello, sir, Doug Williams. I'm the special agent in charge here. So I'm the new guy. I've been to Houston. Been in Houston for about the last 5 months. And I hear you. And I think that that's what this is really about today, right? I just got here, but I can assure you that that's our goal, is to make these next steps. And I know that in this particular conversation today, I know it's really focused on research and that piece of it, but there's one thing that I really want to use my time to really talk about that I think is not necessarily a topic that we're going to hit here today, and it's talking about hate crimes specifically targeting this community. We here in the FBI know that fortunately for us here in Houston, we haven't seen an uptick in that arena. But what we do know is that it's underreported everywhere across the country and across and really across Houston. I believe that those crimes are happening here. And that's what this is really about, is developing that trust. I always say people do get intimidated with the FBI. I meet people a lot of times that say, "Oh, this is the first time I've ever met an FBI agent." I always tell them we're way cooler on TV than we are in real life. But that's what this is about. We want you to feel comfortable. That's why we're here. We want to hear your concerns. And more importantly, we want you to trust us so that when something does happen in this community, which I believe it does, that you feel comfortable in calling us and that we can investigate it.
Thank you, Special Agent Winnie. Anything you want to add, Gigi?
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of the boss's calm narrative, which is something that he speaks to very strongly and is part of his philosophy, is the importance of the partnerships. And those partnerships that extend beyond especially academia, the private sector, the energy sector, and then just the importance of also the diversity piece, right? So if you look across the panel and across the demographics of the Bureau, you'll see that there is a representation amongst all backgrounds, creeds, parental status, down the line, right? And so it's the only way that we can earn the trust of the communities that we serve, along with really building credibility in what we do.
Thank you. And if there's one comment I would like to add to that, I wanted to address specifically one of the comments that were made in the question, and be very clear that as the FBI, when we are speaking about China, we are talking about the government of China and the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people. At the FBI, when we are looking at investigations and cases, we are opening those investigations based on predicated fact that a crime has taken place or there is a threat to national security. Protecting civil liberties is one of our #1 missions, and we are not opening investigations or cases based on race or ethnic creed. So I want to be very clear in making that delineation, because we are using the word China a lot today. We are, again, referring to the government of China and to the Chinese Communist Party. And to echo what S.A.C. Williams mentioned about hate crimes, one of the programs that we are pushing very publicly, specifically to the AAPI community, is that of transnational repression, which is simply the targeting or silencing of dissidents who speak out against any government. But the government of China is one of the most prolific offenders when it comes to trying to silence those voices. And we know that in Houston, that transnational oppression is an issue. We are the FBI, and we do not take that lightly at all. When you are in the United States, whether you are a United States citizen or simply on United States soil, you cannot be targeted or harassed or intimidated by any foreign government. And part of the reason why this conversation is so important is because we want to open the channels of communication. Because if you are being targeted in the community, you know who to reach out to and who to call because we want to talk to you.
Thank you for your comments. I think we have a good basis now to start. We cover what was the history here in Houston. But I think let's try to put the issues in a bigger perspective and what else is happening in the country and worldwide maybe. I think Gisela, as the executive director of Asian American Scholar Forum, your voice has been critical in ensuring a seat at the table for the Asian American scholar community. As a member of Asian American Scholar Forum myself, you make sure that our community has a national voice on policy, laws, and practices that directly impact on Asian American and the broader scholar community. What are some of the Asian American Scholar Forum's recommendations and the insights on how the federal governments can rebuild the trust with the Asian American scholar on the recruitment and the retention of talented Asian American scientists and resulting in chilling effect on the broader research community here in the US? Gisela?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pei and host organizers for having me here on behalf of the Asian American Scholar Forum and our esteemed panelists and guests. As you know, the China Initiative devastated lives of numerous Asian American scholars engaging in everyday academic research and led to measurable chilling effect on the community. It is important, though, to recognize and commend the Department of Justice's decision to end the initiative. This was a crucial step towards de-escalation and an important part of decriminalizing Asian American scientists, researchers, and scholars. However, it was the first step, as Gordon had mentioned, and there is still significant progress that needs to be made to ensure that the U.S. is a welcoming environment that can attract and retain the best and brightest talents from across the world. As we move forward, it's important to see and analyze the harm of previous enforcement actions. A survey conducted by ASF scientists indicated that conducted between December 2021 and March 2022 of over 1,300 faculty members of Chinese descent nationwide, found that an overwhelming majority of survey respondents, 89%, would like to contribute to U.S. leadership in science and technology, but many feel unsafe at 72% and fearful of conducting research at 42%. Further, around 61% of the survey respondents feel pressure to leave the U.S., especially our next generation of junior faculty and federal grant awardees. Nearly half of the respondents intended to avoid federal grant applications due to fear. At the same time, many of these prosecutions and investigations were happening. We saw the rise of anti-Asian hate and violence during the pandemic, as mentioned by some of my colleagues here. According to a 2023 survey, 1 in 2 Asian Americans feel unsafe in the U.S., and nearly 80% of Asian Americans do not feel they belong and are accepted. According to that survey, nearly 1/3 of Americans see Asian Americans as more loyal to their perceived country of origin, and 47% say that what fueled anti-Asian violence was because people see Asian Americans as foreigners rather than Americans. This longstanding perception of Asian Americans as foreigners and threats has had dangerous consequences for our community. Many forget that the incarceration of more than 120,000 Japanese Americans, including children during World War II, was rooted in the racist assumption that people of Japanese descent were more prone to espionage or sabotage. The reality is that the U.S. global leadership in science and technology has greatly benefited from immigrants from other countries, including many scientists and scholars of Chinese descent. Since 2000, 40% of the Nobel Prizes won by Americans in chemistry, medicine, and physics have gone to immigrants. And yet Asian Americans have been invisible in so much of American history that it has made it easy to have them as scapegoats, rather than recognizing the fundamental contributions that they had made to our country, from the ability to have wireless internet everywhere to longer talk times on the phones with our loved ones. Even this Zoom call that I am on would not be possible without the innovation of an Asian American. The chilling effect from laws, policies, rhetoric from government officials, overall presumption and stereotypes that continue to exist in the public narrative, and practices on the ground that harm Asian American scholars hurt this critical pipeline of talent for US innovation, which ultimately hurts all of us. And so to rebuild trust with the Asian American scholar community and undo some of this harm, ASF considers that it's first critical for the Asian American scholar community to have a seat at the table and have a voice. I've said it time and time again, but Asian American scholars have not only faced the brunt as collateral damage to misguided policies, but are also the one that our country needs the most to maintain US leadership in science and technology. Second, rebuilding trust requires policies and processes that are transparent, clear, and have accountability measures. Transparency helps everyone make it easier to follow rapidly changing policies and effectively allocate resources to safeguarding our research and national security. We need clear due process systems for any allegations that allow individuals and or their universities to contest, and to have accountability to ensure that there are necessary measures in place to mitigate and address racial profiling and bias. Third, we should all be in agreement that racial bias, both implicit and explicit, profiling and discrimination exist in our society. And so we need effective protections and also clear messaging from the top to the bottom that this has no place in our government and in law enforcement. First, we need to ground any future efforts in data and facts rather than broad generalizations and theories. And lastly, ASF believes that it's critical that we do not lose sight of our American values and the rich resources that we have inherited as a result of these values. The US global leadership in science and technology have rested on our ability as a country to attract and retain talent from all around the world. And part of that great attraction of the United States is that we're able to offer a welcoming environment where people can live in freedom and dignity as opposed to fear. And so I encourage everyone to let us work together. Let us win this competition by living up to the best in us rather than letting fear-mongering drive away what makes our country great.
Thank you, Gisela. May I also invite you to ask Deputy Assistant Director Jill Murphy the first question?
No, absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, Deputy Assistant Director Jill Murphy, for joining today's discussion. While ASF welcomed the announcement of a formal end to the China Initiative in 2022, it's clear that there's much work that remains to rebuild trust between the federal government and the Asian American and broader scholar community, as well as address the lasting impacts of the China Initiative and other problematic legislation and policies. As we continue this work, what changes has the FBI implemented to address these ongoing concerns from the Asian American and scholar community about the heightened scrutiny and targeting facing Asian Americans? And how is the FBI working to ensure that its processes are transparent, that there are adequate due process and accountability, and that investigations are free from racial bias and profiling? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for your perspective on this important matter. I think I agree with you almost everything that you said. I think that the collaboration in the United States and across the country and the globe is important. And in the United States, we obviously want to draw talent here. And we want that to be, we want people to come here because of our values and our democratic processes. And so I think that the FBI certainly stands for all those things. On the academic and research piece, I feel like we've made progress. And I'm not in the academic world and I'm not a researcher, so I rely on these conversations to inform me. But I do talk to people at the National Science Foundation and NIH and other places. And I know that there's been, they've been working on processes to be more transparent and to have consistency in forms. And so when people are making grant applications, to make it easier to understand, and I think that caused some consternation in the past, and I'm hoping that we're starting to move past that. And if we're not, I'm happy to take those questions, and I'm happy to help you guys get in contact with Rebecca Kaiser at NSF, who I imagine a fair amount of you know, that's more than willing to talk to you about that process. Look, at the FBI, we really want to support this community. We want to support all of our communities in innovation. And we truly believe that economic security is national security. And innovation in the best innovation in the world is in the United States. I think bar none. And I think a lot of that starts at universities. And if I have my numbers right, I think as far as innovation goes, Texas has, because of the universities and the size of Texas, has more innovation than the rest of the United States. And I recognize people might think Silicon Valley, but I think Texas probably creates more things. So I think that those things are really important. I think that these conversations, building relationships with field offices, with our public sector outreach pieces, our academic outreach pieces, I think are all important ways to have the transparency and the understanding. I think Kelly mentioned it before, right? At the FBI, I'm very cognizant of ensuring that we are opening our investigations on predicated facts, of allegations of either things that threaten national security or federal criminal violations. And I'm also cognizant of trying to ensure that we're opening investigations that hit on priority topics for us, right? Like everyone has resource constraints. The FBI is no different than that. We can't work every violation of every federal crime, right? And so how we focus on our threats across the Bureau, I think is really important, and how we focus our efficiencies and our people, our human resources, which is our most valuable resource. But I think we're learning from the community. I will say, like I talked with Committee of 100 earlier this year, and I spoke with them last year, and they talked to me about the correct way to talk about the AAPI community, right? I think there's things that we're doing at the FBI to improve and be better. And I don't think there's malintent on things that we do sometimes. I think there's misunderstandings. And I think if we have relationships and partnerships with the community, you can tell us that something we're doing is wrong, and then we can correct that. I don't think that, I think that we do the best that we can to protect the communities that we're here to serve. And so I think those relationships and partnerships are just so key to that, to be able to have those conversations, those frank conversations where you can inform us and tell us where we can do better.
Thank you, Joe. I think that Rebecca Kaiser is a wonderful resources we have. I think she spoke at the APA Justice Monthly meeting last month. And also she was here on this campus just 2 weeks ago. And I think she spoke at a workshop here that 10 is the host. And basically that's the workshop she sponsored. Yes, definitely, I think she has a very good relationship with the whole research community. Well, let me turn the question down to a more local level. David, I think the Academy and also Asian American community has been working with the American Civil Liberty Union, ACLU, on many civil rights related issues important to our community. And ACLU Texas in particular, and you have been working with us and very supportively last year, for example, for the Texas SB 147, the land bill. Let me start with you. Then maybe Gordon and others can chime in. Do you have any suggestions of how our community can work with the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies on national and academic security issues? How can the FBI and the community establish a better communication channel? I think 5 years ago, we did not have a dialogue. We had 2 monologues. And Gordon, and you can follow with David.
David, go ahead.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the question. And I'm also just very grateful for the opportunity to be in this space. This is the first dialogue of this kind that I have seen. And I think it, in and of itself, is a real testament to the willingness of these agencies to work with the community. I don't think this is something that we're going to get right and then we're going to stay getting it right forever. I think it has to be an iterative process. It has to be a dialogue. Gisela, in my opinion, already hit the nail on the head in terms of identifying what I think are two very important pillars of the community law enforcement relationship. And those are transparency and accountability. Transparency is more than one way. It's not only sitting down at a table and having a dialogue, although it's very important. It's also having meaningful policies in place that are rigorous and clear and easy to understand. And those policies should be subject to scrutiny. And it's also very important in this room and understanding the origins of this forum to say that the policies are not just intra-agency, how does the FBI handle investigations, but how does it work with other law enforcement agencies, entities, and federal agencies as well. Big concerns for people at the airport, for example, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but how is the FBI working with Customs and Border Protection? How is it working with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, USCIS, local law enforcement? If we do have those dialogues in those spaces, how can people be assured that they and their families are not at risk? And I think accountability is another big piece. It's not just retroactive accountability. Rights have been violated. Can they bring a lawsuit? It's also accountability in the respect of what are the redress provisions. If someone is rejected or investigated, how can they navigate them? I'm going to add one more big pillar that I think is quite important, and that is leadership. I believe that the agencies here have tremendous power and influence, and they should be using it. And so just to put this in context, Dr. Pei mentioned Senate Bill 147. For those of you who don't know, that was a bill proposed in the Texas legislature last year that would have prohibited any national from China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia from purchasing property here in the state of Texas. And I think all of us can agree we want the same things. We want safety, we want security and civil liberties and to honor the Constitution. And a law like SB 147, it swept far too broadly because it didn't matter who the person from China was. It just mattered that they had Chinese nationality, whether they were lawful permanent residents or visa holders. And fortunately, with the advocacy of the Texas Multicultural Advocacy Coalition, Dr. Pei and others, that bill did not pass in Texas, but we have seen nationwide hundreds of these bills proposed in state legislatures, many of them passed. We're litigating it in Florida as we speak. And that's a very important context with which to approach this conversation, because there's what the agency is doing on the one hand, but then there is also the way that the public interprets and internalizes that information. And so while we can appreciate the nuance between, we can condemn the Chinese government and we can say that they are harming people's liberties, but how is that being received by policymakers, by members of the public, and how is that being felt by members of these communities? And so my plea to the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Department of Justice, of course, there is so much work that you necessarily have to do without public disclosure and transparency. That's just the nature of law enforcement. We understand it. But there is also a very valuable message that you can be communicating. You can be out in the front and say that these laws sweep too broadly, that you should begin all of these investigations with individualized particular suspicion, that it is unfair, unreasonable, and unjust to sweep all people together into categories based on national origin. And I personally haven't seen too much of that. I haven't seen too much of that nuance. Even in our litigations, I haven't seen the federal government coming forward and saying, we disagree with these laws, which we would call xenophobic, racist, discriminatory, but which we cannot, by virtue of our limited information, paint the same picture that you all can. And so I believe that that leadership is critical, and it is valuable to the community's trust in you all as well. If you are seen as an ally, as a partner who is promoting everybody's safety, and safety doesn't just mean safety from violent threats, it also means the ability of people to go outside free from hate crimes or suspicion based on how they look. And I believe that there's so much that can be gained from a dialogue like this one.
Thank you, David. Gordon, and also maybe later, U.S. Attorney Al, maybe you can chime in. Gordon, you go first.
Well, let me just say first, welcome to Houston, Doug. I mean, hopefully this is the beginning of a good relationship with our community. And Gigi and Kelly, I look forward to working with you as well here locally. But I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can go with. You know, I look at the fact that when we're dealing with an immigrant community, that tells me, and maybe it's because of my bias as an immigration lawyer, that they had to go through this immigration process and that they needed, you know, who could they turn to if they have a legal issue? We have a very active Asian Bar Association. We have a very active Immigration Bar Association. And I think if we can develop a dialogue with them so that when things come up, they know, oh, I can go to my lawyer. I can ask them about it. And the lawyer has somebody they can reach out to as well. You may know, and I'm sure you're familiar with various visas, that if a person is cooperating with the agency, the U visa, victim of crime, or the S visa, if they're helping provide vital information, or the T visa, if you find people who are being trafficked. But, you know, the average person is like lost as to what is available in within the law to protect them if they want to cooperate with the government. You know, it's a person who has some courage to stick their neck out, and they just don't want it to be chopped off. And so I think if we can develop that relationship and the tools that you have to help the community, I think we can, you know, build that trust that they're not alone in trying to share information in a positive way to help the government.
Thank you, Gordon. Al?
Oh, great. Hello, everybody. My name is Alamdar Hamdani. I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas. I'll explain a little bit. This is a little bit of a homecoming for me with some of these folks, but let me tell you what the Southern District of Texas is before I go any further, just so you understand kind of what my roles and responsibilities are, because I didn't know what the Southern District of Texas was when I was even a beginning lawyer. So first of all, let me tell you that the lens I see the world through. I'm a migrant. My mother and father were migrants twice over, once from India to England, and then from England to America. I was born in England with my little sister. My daddy was a cab driver in England. He was a cab driver in the United States. I grew up in a small, roach-infested 2-bedroom apartment in Euless, Texas, otherwise known as Eustis, Texas. That is the framework that I see the world through. So as the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas, I am the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in a district that is probably the 4th or 5th largest district in the country. And I'll tell you a little bit about the department, and I'll tell you what a district is. The Department of Justice is the world's largest law firm, but the Department of Justice was started in 1870 in the wake of the end of the Civil War. And it started because the Attorney General at the time said, I need lawyers to protect the rights of newly freed slaves. And so in 1870, Congress created the Department of Justice to protect newly freed slaves from organizations like the KKK. And in 2 years, they had 3,000 indictments and 600 convictions. The Department of Justice is not only the world's largest law firm, is not only the world's oldest law firm, it is the world's oldest civil rights firm. Those are the bones of the Department of Justice. Department of Justice is based in DC. You've got the criminal division, which does criminal work, the civil division, which does civil work. You have the National Security Division, which I worked for 5 years in, which does counterterrorism, counterintelligence work. But I'll tell you, the tip of the spear, where in my opinion, the real work is done, is in the 94 different United States Attorney's offices. The Southern District of Texas is 44,000 square miles, 43 counties. We come all the way from above Houston all the way down to the border. I have 400 miles of border with Mexico. I deal with human smuggling, human trafficking, drug trafficking, cartels. I deal with public corruption. I deal with violent crime, not only along the border, but in the streets of Houston. On top of that, though, and what I am familiar with, is we also deal with national security issues. Here in Houston, of course, we are, you've got counterterrorism threats, counterintelligence threats, you've got PRC, you've got Russia, you've got Iran. All of these countries provide different sorts of national security threats to the United States. I told you this is a little bit of a homecoming. Before I joined the department 16 years ago, I was a lawyer in private practice. And on 9/11, I was 2 years out of law school. I was working at a big law firm. And I realized that people who looked like me or shared my parents' faith at the time would be looked at with eyes jaundiced by the deeds of Muslim terrorists. So I did what I thought was right. I protected Muslims, South Asians, and Arabs in FBI interviews pro bono. I joined the board of the ACLU of Texas. I was the ACLU's representative debating the United States Attorney's Office in Houston in open forums, the office I now run. And through that process, I got to work with great people like Gordon Kwan and great organizations like the ACLU. I was in many of these forums with the FBI, and the distrust that some may feel I felt as a brown person in a post 9/11 America. And so I say that to say I understand and appreciate kind of the fears that the community feels, especially the Asian American community, as I am an Asian American. And I learned so many things, for example, from Gordon Kwan back in the day. And I even took on some habeas immigration cases as a civil rights lawyer. But I joined the department 16 years ago. Most of my practice has been in the national security space. And I can tell you this, what we do at the Department of Justice, at least what we strive to do every day, is a two-word edict. You do justice. And part of that justice is making sure, as you said, David, as Gordon says, you know, the cases we look at, we don't, you know, looking at somebody's race should never be the factor that opens up a case. Every case is looked at individually. And at the end of the day, we try to do justice, balancing civil rights, civil liberties, and of course, national security interests. And hopefully gives you an idea of kind of why I'm here and what we do.
Thank you, Al. I think let's move to the next question. I think, David, you mentioned about the border issue. Since February, there have been several reports from Nature, from Science, from Washington Post, from The Guardian, and most recently on Bloomberg, about what the foreign graduate students and academic researchers with green card or even US citizenship run into at the US port of the entry. We also received many questions and comments from the participants of this forum and asking questions related to the border issues here. Unfortunately, the customers and the Border Protection CBP is not here today to respond to these questions. But ACLU has done some research on this, the rise of people at the airports. And would you please advise our audience what they should do or not do if they run into similar situations? Dave?
Yes, absolutely. And I so appreciate the question. I think it's very important. And I wish that CBP was here because I think that they have a very valuable voice in helping to navigate this difficulty. And to add some context to the articles Dr. Pei was mentioning, there have been dozens of students with visas from the United States State Department who arrive at United States airports, and then they are taken to secondary screening at Customs and Border Protection, and then they are told they cannot enter the country. They are made to buy plane tickets home, and then they have a 5-year bar on their ability to re-enter the United States. And these are students who are at prominent United States colleges, universities, research institutions, undergraduates, graduate students, Ph.D.s. And I think what's critical is they have a visa from the United States Department of State, and then they cannot enter when they arrive. Adding insult to injury, it's an $1,800 plane ticket home. And one of the frustrations that these students express is they are never told why it is they're not permitted to enter. Those who can get an attorney do so after the fact, and I'll get to that in a second. The attorneys will read the transcripts of their interviews. It's unclear what, if anything, was the reason that prevented their entry. And then it is unclear what the process is for redress if you are a student, as some of the students are. They're fifth-year Ph.D. students. They have to defend their dissertation. That's all that's left. And then they aren't able to come into the United States. What can they do to remedy the situation? And the answer, unfortunately, is we don't know. And when we talk about transparency, that's a problem. When we talk about accountability, that's a problem. And so the transparency has to be intra-agency, as I said, but also interagency. Where is the disconnect between state and Customs and Border Protection? What role, if any, is the Federal Bureau of Investigations playing here? And what can people do if they are aggrieved? And so that's one of the very frustrating and unfortunate pieces of context that we come into today's discussion with. And it is a large animating feature of the statistics that Gisela was describing. If you are a Chinese student, it used to be that coming to the United States was a gold standard. We are a city on a hill, and now it is terrifying because you truly do not know if you begin your studies, if you will be able to re-enter the United States. And so the question that was posed to me is, what are your rights at the border? And the unfortunate answer is you have very few. And if you'll indulge me in a little bit of history, the origin of this, as I understand it, and I've read quite a lot of history, is in the 1880s with something called Chinese exclusion. There was a man named Che Chanping. He was an immigrant from China who worked in Northern California for over a decade. And for the very first time, after living here for over a decade, he received a document from the United States government that said he could go home and re-enter the United States. So he went home to China, visited. You can imagine it was elation because he got to see his family again. The month he left China to return to the United States, he used to have to come on a boat. It took a long time. Between his leaving China and his entering the United States government enacted a law that said, effectively, his re-entry visa was rescinded and no Chinese national could enter the United States. That's what Chinese exclusion was. So far as I know, it's the first immigration regulation the United States ever passed, because before then, immigration was free into the United States. So Mr. Ping arrived in San Francisco at the port, and he was denied entry. He sued. His case went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court said, tough luck. As a country, we have the right to control our borders. That means determining who can enter or not. That case is foundational. I litigate border and immigrants' rights issues. One of the main arguments that we make against Texas's immigration ban, Senate Bill 4, the deportation law, is that immigration is a federal prerogative. That's where that comes from. If you're a sovereign, you control your borders. And so for the past 150 years, that has been the foundation. The interests of national security, the interests of the United States are at their peak at the border, and that means that civil rights and civil liberties are diminished there. We have a Fourth Amendment right to be free from unconstitutional searches and seizures. There is something called the border search exception. So every person who passes through an international boundary into the United States, you are subject to search. You are subject to questioning, to your luggage being searched, your bags being searched, whether you are a United States citizen or whether you are a lawful permanent resident or a visa holder, without reasonable suspicion or individual suspicion, without probable cause or a warrant. And that's true for everybody. If you've been at the border, you know that normally you go and you present to that first kiosk, that's called primary. They say, where have you been? If you are a United States citizen, the purpose of that, the primary purpose is to verify your identity and therefore whether you can be admitted into the United States. They can search your bags to make sure that you're not bringing in any contraband. That's the customs part of Customs and Border Protection. If you are a lawful permanent resident, you have the same rights. Theoretically, you can enter the United States and only an immigration judge can prevent you from doing so. I'm going to focus on those two first. If you are a US citizen or lawful permanent resident, you do not have to answer questions about anything but your admissibility. And with that being said, as a practical matter, you probably should, because if you don't, they can delay your entry into the United States. They can make it a lot more difficult. You can be taken to what's called secondary inspection. Those are those rooms off of the border kiosk where they can ask you questions. So they can be quite a long time. So you have the right to refuse to answer questions, although as a practical matter, you likely should answer. If you are a visa holder or a non-lawful permanent resident, non-citizen, you can simply be denied admission into the United States. So you can be turned away. You can be turned away for not answering questions. You can be turned away in the experience of these students for reasons that remain very unclear to you. And I think that there are a lot of practical questions. I'm going to focus on one of them, but I will point you all, we have done a resource called Know Your Rights at the Border. If you Google it and you Google ACLU, you will find it. But one of the key questions that I think are on mind for us today, because I see a lot of cell phones, is, well, what about your electronic devices? Because in many ways, searching your phone is a lot more intrusive than searching your luggage. But Customs and Border Protection takes the position that they can do a search of your electronic devices, and that includes your laptop, your phone, without particular suspicion. So for just everybody who passes through. If you are a non-lawful permanent resident or visa holder, in all likelihood, you just have to give them access to your phone. If your phone is password protected, do you have to give them the password? If you are a citizen or lawful permanent resident, no, but again, what they can then do is they can seize your phone and conduct what's called a forensic search. So they can hold it. The average detention time of your phone is often many months. It should be shorter, but it takes time. That's where they download all of the contents of your phone so that they can analyze it. How can you protect yourself? I think because of the nature of this conversation, I'm going to speak to students and researchers generally. First, even though Customs and Border Protection takes the position that you do not have the right to an attorney during primary or secondary inspection, it can still be worthwhile to have an attorney's contact information, or at least the number of a legal services organization, for two reasons. If you are in secondary inspection and it's taken, let's say, over 2 hours, because many of these can take several hours, it could be time to try and contact an attorney. They may not let you, but it could be helpful to have that information. Or a letter from an attorney that says they represent you, because perhaps that can give you more rights in the process. It may also be in your interest, if you are a non-citizen student or researcher, to have a letter from your employer that describes your affiliation and the work that you do, because that hopefully can help protect you as well, to have the contact information of your university's resource officer who can help you navigate these situations. And then one other plug that I would make is Customs and Border Protection, their policy is not to search materials that are stored in the cloud. So, you know, if you have your Gmail will have materials downloaded to your phone as well as materials in the cloud. It is generally advisable to have your phone in airplane mode, because if your phone is confiscated for forensic examination and you don't put it in airplane mode, if your phone is like mine, it's going to continue downloading your emails and your text messages until it is returned to you. So there are just all sorts of practical things that we should consider when we're passing through borders and ports of entry. But the critical piece of it is that our rights are at their lowest point at the border.
Thank you, David. Here's a question from the participants. I think quite a few raised the question. If a person is aggrieved by what they run into at the airport, what are their options? Dave or Gordon?
David gave a good answer, but unfortunately, I know actually Stephen has called me saying, oh, these students are coming back from China and they're being turned away. And the situation is you're not considered in the United States until they admit you through the port of entry. So since you're not in the United States, even though you're at Intercontinental Airport or wherever, you're not covered by the Constitution of the United States. You have no right to an attorney. And it's frustrating as can be personally, because just as David described, these individuals have taken a trans-Pacific flight, 16 hours, they're here tired, and somebody at the port says, I'm sorry, we have to put you in secondary. No, we're returning you. And you're like, what did I do? We can't tell you, we're just not gonna admit you. And they go back to China, they may get their visa again after they do a security background check. But the waste of time and the discouragement is, and I have the phone number for the assistant port director, and I'll call her and she'll say, Mr. Kwan, you don't have a G28 on file, I can't talk to you. And you know they have no rights, and I can't even tell you about their case. So I'm sorry, I'm frustrated at this point. And I wish I could tell them what to do. As David said, maybe it's good to have a letter from an attorney. Sometimes they'll be nice and let you talk to them. When I was on city council, Bill White was mayor, we had, the offshore technology conference. And Bill called me one day and said, I had a friend of mine who came in, he was a big oil executive. He came into Intercontinental Airport and we asked him, how was your stay in Houston? He said, I'm never coming back again. And he said, why not? So the way I was treated at the airport by CBP, it was like I was a criminal. I was there for 10 hours before they finally let me in. We formed a task force at that time. We had 2 former ambassadors as the chair of our task force, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat. And we said, can't you at least treat people kind of a little more humanely? And they said, well, we're about, if we make a mistake, it could be deadly. So we have to be tough. And we sent off some of our staff to Washington Airport, to Miami, to New York. They all got in with no problem. Houston, we had a problem. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer on that.
Thank you, Gordon and Dave. Well, Assistant Special Agent in charge, Pickering. So Gigi, here's a related question for you. Is the Houston FBI office coordinate operations and procedures to address national and research security related issues with other law enforcement agency at the local level, for example, with the Customs and Border Protection at the Bush Airport, for example? Do you have any joint task forces or liaison officers assigned to work with each other in their office? For example, the Homeland Security investigation in Houston. In other words, how does the law enforcement allocate responsibilities between the various agencies?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question. Yes. And we do. We work very collaboratively with other agencies, local, state, and federal. As we've said before, amongst the executive team, the concept of partnerships, we cannot do our job without each other, and that extends even into the communities, which is why we also have a squad and a team that specifically has duties to conduct outreach into the multiple communities out there. But with regards to the task forces, yes, we do have a joint terrorism task force to address terrorism matters. And we do also have a counterintelligence task force to address counterintelligence matters. And these teams are made up of multiple different officers from a multitude of different agencies, federal, state, and local. And our task force teams allow us to coordinate and collaborate on matters where all of our jurisdictions may overlap. And just wanted to extend gratitude also to Gordon for providing feedback on how we can improve on more open lines of communication, which we will definitely work to improve on through all of our venues, whether being in the community and to our energy sector, private sector partners, and along with our academic partners and federal agencies.
Thank you. I think the next question I want to direct to Deputy Assistant Director Murphy. I think a year ago, the Department of Justice and the Commerce launched this disruptive technology strike force to bring together experts throughout the government, including the FBI, the Homeland Security Investigation, and the 14 U.S. attorneys. And the 12 metropolitan areas across the country were identified. One of them is Houston. And I think the task is to target illicit actors, strengthen supply chain, and protect critical technology assets from being acquired or used by national state adversaries, unquote. Are these guidelines published internally or externally, and how this coordinate at the federal level? Because I think we heard about the frustration we have at the local level.
So thank you for the question. I'll start to answer and then I'll pass it over. So at the FBI, this is a Department of Justice and Commerce-led disruptive technology task force, and it's focused on the illegal procurement or transfer of technology to adversarial governments like Russia, Iran, or the PRC. And on the policies or procedures, I'll let the U.S. Attorney handle that piece. But I will tell you that the focus is really on protecting the transfer of the technology. It's country agnostic. It's really on priority technology pieces. So not focused on specific countries, other than countries that we have sanctions or aversions towards giving technology to. So with that, I'll pass it over.
Yeah.
So thank you. I think I want to acknowledge, first of all, Gisela and Gordon and all those who said, look, we've got to, in the wake of past initiatives, get to reframe the issue because of how it's focused on the Asian American community. And so, first of all, I want to commend folks like y'all for doing that. The Disruptive Technology Strike Force is a strike force that was created in February of 2023. A few months after the Assistant Attorney General for the National Security Division went and had a public speech talking about moving on from the China initiative and really looking at threats. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at threats. And if you look at, when I started the National Security Division back in 2010, on the first page of the National Threat Assessment. Oh, can you hear me? It's not on. Oh, I'll take that. It's all right. No, I just want to, yeah. But when I started the National Security Division back in 2010, if you looked at the first page of the National Threat Assessment, which is an assessment that's put out by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence about all the threats in the, against the United States. On page 1 was Al-Qaeda. When I started the National Security Division, I was in the Al-Qaeda unit. And it wasn't until later on, when about page 20, and soon after that, you'd see PRC and Russia and Iran. Now, if you look at the National Threat Assessment, today on page 1 is PRC, right after that is Russia, right after that is Iran. And why is that? Because they're in the business of stealing technologies that are crucial to the defense of the United States. And at the end of the day, what the Disruptive Technology Strike Force is doing is focusing on technologies that could be dual used. That could be, for example, ending up in weapon systems. For example, missiles that fall into Ukraine oftentimes have American technology in those Russian missiles. That's what we're trying to prevent. The same thing with the PRC. The PRC, as we all heard earlier, is in the business of, for example, looking at critical infrastructure, using cyber operations to do that. Why? So they can, for example, take technologies like those that power AI, semiconductor chips, that whole chain, that supply chain. If anybody knows, when you do business in the PRC, if you have a software company, you're probably going to have to disclose your code. And so there's issues such as zero-day vulnerabilities that are at the heart of the work we do. So the Disruptive Technology Strike Force takes 14 different United States Attorney's offices. The Southern District of Texas is one of them, teams up with Department of Commerce's Bureau of, I always want to make sure I get it right. It's called BIS. It is the Bureau of Industry and Security, a very weird name. It's very government-esque. But the Bureau of Industry and Security is all about making sure that technology doesn't go from the United States and end up in the wrong hands by nation-state actors. And it is, at the end of the day, you know, an important part of this mission. What is the mission? So safeguarding the integrity and transparency of research institutions is a matter of national security. But also, we also understand, but so is ensuring that we continue to attract the best and brightest researchers and scholars to our country from all around the world, and that we all continue to honor our traditions of academic openness and collaboration. The Disruptive Technology Strike Force is about making sure we hold on to those ideals while also protecting the national security of the United States. And so with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Well, one question maybe I think the Supervisory Special Agent Choi and Kelly, maybe you can comment on. How does this impact on the local operation, or maybe any of you, at your local operation in Houston level?
Absolutely. So I have the distinct pleasure of being the FBI representative for the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. And what I've seen since its implementation is I really want to reinforce that this is a country agnostic program. It does not look at any country specifically. It is just looking at the type of technology that is being potentially being obtained. And one of the benefits that I've seen and now I'm going to be speaking from my years as a case agent prior to becoming a supervisor, is that when you have an investigation that you're at the point where it's time to bring in the U.S. Attorney's Office, if it's a disruptive technology and it's on the list of the technologies that we are concerned about adversaries getting their hands on, these type of cases go to the front of the line. And working very closely with Mr. Hamdani and his office, we have seen these cases to where at some point, and let's be honest, we're talking about the federal government. We do not move at the speed of light. We move at the speed of federal government. But when we are talking about technologies that can be used by our adversaries to harm the U.S., and I want to acknowledge that this is the 8th anniversary of Normandy. And so not only the U.S., but the U.S. and our allies abroad, we want to make sure that technology does not leave here, because once it's gone, it's gone. And so what I have seen from the level where I sit is these cases being expedited, being moved quickly, and being able to, at times, because we are partnering with CBP and we are partnering with BIS, if we know this technology is physically trying to leave the country, we can come in and stop it and seize it and prevent it from getting into adversarial hands. And that is one of the best benefits that I have seen with this. We just had our first annual conference a few months ago, and the amount of cases that we had specifically working this type of technology across the Bureau and our partner agencies, there was I don't have the exact number, but there was a significant increase in looking at this specific type of technology, which is a major step forward for why we're here today, because what we are looking at is making sure that, again, we are protecting the U.S. and her interests, not targeting or going after people from an ethnic origin. And I know that is part of the concern why we're here today. And that is what we see with the DTSF, is that we are looking at what we should be looking at is the technology that we're trying to prevent and getting into the hands of our enemies.
Thank you, Kelly. I think now we have a good understanding of the landscape we are dealing with. So the next question is, how do we move forward? I think to build a steady relationship, one challenge we deal with is because FBI, I think you rotate people all the time, every 2-3 years, maybe. I was talking to Bob Tripp, the special agent in charge in San Francisco. He will have to retire in 2 years because 57 years capped. So I think that's the big present challenge, right? So we got to work with you well. And the 2 years you retire, then we have to start from scratch again. So how do we overcome that problem? I think that's one thing we have been hearing from not just us, but also different professional group as well. That how do we maintain that continuity?
Sure. Great question. And I hope I'm not going to retire and leave anytime soon. I want to be here. And if the director's watching, please don't move me anywhere. I want to be here. But first, thank you, Dr. Pei. Thank you for this environment that we're in. It has been very beneficial to me and my entire team here to kind of hear the concerns of the community. And that's really why we're here. And I think, as you alluded to, in our world, in the FBI, it's not just an organization that sits in Houston. We are nationwide. In fact, we have FBI folks worldwide. Almost in every U.S. embassy, there's an FBI person that sits there. And that's because crime is really international. The threats are international. So we have FBI people all across the world whose job is to coordinate with local officials there. So with that, and our goal here today is really to establish a relationship with you and the whole Asian community, with the FBI and FBI Houston. Not me, not Gigi, not Kelly, not Jill, but really the FBI as a whole, because as the faces will change in a big organization, that happens. People get promoted. You have to go here. You have to go there. Like, people will turn and the faces will change. But I think the goal here, and we've kind of hit it earlier today, is about establishing relationships and establishing trust. And really with establishing trust, it's relationship building, and that takes time and effort. And whether I'm here or whether I'm introducing the next person to you to kind of keep that conversation going, that's what we're here and about doing. Because again, at the end of the day, and if nobody takes anything from this, I hope that people will take that. I am privileged to lead. Houston is a wonderful city. I think it's the most diverse city in the country, right? And with that is a responsibility that I really have is as far as protecting this entire community here. And I am privileged to serve Houston and the state of Texas and the United States with the best people in the world. I always say that no one gets rich working for the government. None of us are getting rich, but at the end of the day, we are rich in job satisfaction, that when we drive home at night, we know that we've made a difference in the world and helping people. And the FBI attracts people who want to do that, who want to help other folks. And that's where they get their value. They're not really receiving value in money. It's really in the job satisfaction piece of it. And so this here is listening to you, and this really isn't about the Asian Americans. And I want folks to know that that's not what we're doing. That's not what we're looking at. We want to help and protect that entire community, whether it's from transnational repression, whether it's from hate crimes or civil rights violations. And I can't promise I'll be here forever. They kicked me out of here at 57. I'm almost 50, so I got 7 years to go. But eventually my time will come to an end here. But I hope and I assure you that the relationship that you have and this community has with the FBI certainly won't end with me.
Thank you, Doug. Let us take the question all the way to the top, okay? At the top level, the national policy for science technology was set by the National Science Technology Council at the cabinet level, okay? I think at that level, as far as we know, we've been working with the White House Office of Science Policy Technology a lot. And then where in the past, Neal was the director. And I think they try very hard to strike a balance between the national security, the American high-tech competitiveness, and also the civil rights issue of the individuals. I think right now what we are facing today is, for example, if we look at special case, I think, yes, Attorney, you mentioned artificial intelligence, okay? In artificial intelligence, I think US is currently at the forefront of advancement in AI. But lately, our lead has begun to slip. It now holds approximately about 42% of the world's top AI talent. And it is a drop from around 59% 3 years ago. That's a big drop. At the same time, more than half of the AI researchers in the US are from China. Based on data from the State Department, the number of the students from China studying in the US had dropped by 20% by a peak of 370,000 in 2019. So I think the question is back to Deputy Assistant Director Murphy. In regard to the US-China relationship in academic, how does the FBI balance the need to safeguard US economic security with preserving the civil liberty, constitutional rights, and academics need to collaborate with foreign partners?
So thank you for the question. So I think we've hit on this already. And so I'll just walk kind of back through how I think about it and how I think the FBI thinks about it. Look, we strongly, is that better?
Yes.
You know, like the FBI encourages, supports collaboration. We want the best and the brightest to come here and study. And so there's nothing that the FBI wants to do to stop that collaboration. What we don't want is people that are incentivized to steal technology, and whether that's to take it back to China or any other country. And so, you know, I think the statistics on this are challenging. I think some of, you know, like through COVID times, but there's obviously been a shift in perceptions on how we're dealing with stuff in the United States. And I think that's why we're here today, right? Is to have a dialogue about this, to start the conversation, to continue the conversation, to build the relationships, to hear what you guys and the community thinks, so we can be better at our jobs, because we need the best and the brightest to want to come to the United States and study. And we need them to want to stay here, right? To make great things happen, not just for our country, but for everyone.
Thank you, Jill. So Gisela, thank you for patiently sitting there up in the cloud from where we are looking up to you. I think it was a year ago, the Secretary of Homeland Security, they've created a Homeland Security Academic Partnership Council. And they were tasked to evaluate and provide recommendations around foreign malign influence in higher education institutions. Based on your interaction with both the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the several federal agencies, do you consider it is a possible way to narrow the gap between the National Science Technology Policy set by NSTC and the FBI, HSI, CBP, all the agents working at the forefront of the law enforcement?
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. And I want to lift up that the subcommittee's report on foreign malign influence was just released today. And so certainly encourage others to look through that report, especially on the section on research security that ASF was very happy to provide our expertise on. I see this really is a question about how do we adequately implement policies on the ground and not lose anything in translation, especially many of these guiding principles that the Biden administration and other federal agencies have. I turn to ASF's principles, which is that constructive dialogue, practices grounded in reality and common sense, and a data-driven approach towards solutions will ultimately benefit us all. I believe that those same principles, when applied here, will help us narrow that gap. We've seen this successfully in practice as we convene dialogue between federal agency leaders and university leaders and provided our expertise to legislators and key thought partners. It's very clear to us, even as a community, that these are difficult problems that take time to solve, time to implement, and time to correct and adjust. And I have no doubt that many public servants want to do the right thing. And we need to create systems, a culture of inclusivity, and procedures that allow them to do that. We need policies that are flexible and adaptable, recognizing that there are so many legislation coming out of Congress. And it's very difficult for the community, for staffers to try to adapt. And we also need to make sure that these policies change over time as we gather more data and reporting on the impact. We understand that many of these impacts are potentially unintended, but we also need to make sure that these policies change over time because it's still going to be having severe consequences on the communities on the ground. We need protection and training to address racial bias, both implicit and explicit, as well as more scientific experts and thought leaders being included in the discussion with FBI, CBP, and law enforcement. And the last thing is we need to keep in mind that we cannot have Asian American scholars be collateral damage while we take the time to try to get this right. With regards to NSTC, for those who are not aware, they had issued guidance to implement NSPM 33 to direct federal agencies to protect U.S. government-supported research and development. From top to bottom, it's important to remember what exactly are the core principles of this guidance. They are: 1, to protect America's security and openness; 2, to be clear that researchers can easily and properly comply, meaning we need to think about implementation; and lastly, to ensure that policies do not fuel xenophobia or prejudice. There was one provision in all of the guidance that was mandatory, and that was the non-discriminatory clause. This clause recognized what David had lifted up earlier, which is the problem of sweeping generalizations based on national origin, and the importance of public leaders in the administration and federal agencies to publicly lift up this principle against prejudice and discrimination. Moreover, it is not just about publicly saying we're against prejudice and discrimination. Many of the problems that faced Asian American scholars were also due to the fact that many of these policies and practices were overly broad and vague, and that allowed for individual racial bias to seep in and impact the many experiences that Asian Americans have, whether it's with FBI agents at their homes or at airports and ports of entry with CBP. It's crucial that the non-discriminatory clause and the principles behind NSTC's guidance can't be lost as we translate it from federal agencies and universities. Much of the recommendations I shared earlier when it comes to transparency and having greater procedures in place will help narrow the gap between NSTC's guidance and implementation at a later stage with federal agencies and law enforcement. We also need greater coordination and communication between various levels of government that will help best practices flourish between different agencies and hopefully also allow for scientific and community perspectives to be included. Even if policies to address racial bias and policies that promote values integral to the success of U.S. research are set at the highest level, if we don't translate this to law enforcement offices and agents on the ground across the country, that will still mean that Asian Americans are going to remain vulnerable to individual bias and profiling. And ultimately, that is going to hurt America's ability to compete on a global scale. I end this with lifting up a cautionary warning from the guidance that, quote, if our policies to address research security challenges significantly diminish our superpower of attracting global scientific talent, or if they fuel xenophobia against Asian Americans, we will have done more damage to ourselves than any competitor or adversary could. So we need to have a thoughtful and effective approach. And this thoughtful and effective approach needs to include implementation on the ground and needs to address the realities that Asian American scholars face and the limitations that many have who may have, whether it's implicit or explicit, racial bias. We cannot keep shooting ourselves in the foot. Many Asian American scholars, as I mentioned in our data earlier, want to contribute to the US leadership in science and technology. It was their dream to come to the United States and pursue their research here. And so it's important that we have here today not a choice between one or the other, between our civil rights or the US remaining a global leader in science and technology. We have the opportunity to actually have both. That by living up to our American values, that we also ensure a more prosperous and stronger United States of America. That inclusivity, rather than discrimination, is going to be the most pragmatic approach towards ensuring that we have the best talents.
Thank you, Gisela, and all our panelists. Anybody has the last word you want to say before we ask our leaders to wrap up?
I want to recognize another distinguished leader who's joined us, the Bishop James Dixon, who's co-chair of the Texas Multicultural Coalition. So thank you for being here.
Sorry, Bishop, I did not recognize you coming in, so I was too busy. If there's no more comments from any panelist, may I invite our U.S. Attorney, Panani? I think you are coming from the other side of the law enforcement, you're on the prosecution side. You want to provide something from your perspective about your impression or reflection from the discussion today.
Yes. First of all, before I forget, as you know, I have the privilege of leading an office I was in for 8.5 years as an assistant U.S. attorney. I have the privilege of leading 400 wonderful public servants. 200 of them are federal prosecutors. And I will say one of the most important relationships we have as federal prosecutors and members of the Department of Justice are with these people right here at the FBI. Doug Williams and I just had breakfast this morning. We have breakfast every month. I say that to say this relationship is important. This dialogue that we have is important. And it's important too, as was said earlier, to protecting both the civil rights, the civil liberties, and our national security in one fell swoop. Something I learned when I was doing civil rights and civil liberties work, and something I get to put in practice every day. You know, as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, I am charged with, at the end of the day, disrupting and protecting those who would do harm to the 9 million souls who live in the Southern District of Texas. And the Department of Justice has a three-pronged goal: protecting the national security, right? Protecting democracy, and protecting civil rights. And those are the three-pronged goals of every federal prosecutor and public servant I represent and I lead. But to do that, we can't do that in a vacuum. We've got to do that with each and every one of you. And this dialogue, I can tell you, is incredibly uplifting, incredibly important. So Dr. Pei, thank you for leading this. And my friends at the FBI, I can tell you, I have my cards and I will give them out. They have my cell number. And the reason I say that is because, again, I can't do what I'm supposed to do without dialoguing and understanding the community. A community I used to once, you know, when I was in the private sector, be an advocate for, and still am today, now in the public sector. So the hope is, after today, this dialogue will continue. And why is that? Because I can't protect you if at times you don't tell me you need to be protected. I can't work with my folks here to come out and make sure that we protect you, right, and your security unless we know about it. And you can't be afraid to talk to folks here or to me. And so I want to let you know you know, that's why this is important to open up that dialogue. And finally, I want to end with just a little something about being part of the Department of Justice. So as I said earlier, all 400 individuals who work at the Department of Justice have a 2-word edict. I don't care if it means a conviction or it means dismissal of a case. It means do justice. And I'm going to read to you just what the Attorney General in 1940 said to a group full of U.S. attorneys. His name was Robert Jackson. He would go on to become a Supreme Court Justice. And these are the guiding principles of what I do every day. The qualities of a good prosecutor are as elusive and as impossible to define as those which mark a gentleman. This is 1940, and also women, of course. And those who need to be told will not understand it anyway. A sensitiveness to fair play in sportsmanship is perhaps the best protection against the abuse of power. And the citizen's safety, your safety, lies in the prosecutor who tempers zeal with human kindness, who seeks truth and not victims, who serves the law and not factional purposes, and who approaches his task with humility. And so with humility, I say thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Al. I think before I ask the special agent in charge, willing to give you some remark, I have an announcement to make. I think we are talking about continuation. I just heard the people who introduced me to Bob Tips. They are going to organize a forum in San Francisco, most likely in the month of August. So this will continue on, not only in Houston, but also in other cities. So, Doug?
Yes, sir. Well, first and foremost, I don't know how I'm supposed to follow the U.S. Attorney's speech there. So you put me in a really bad position here. But I just want to say thank you. And on behalf of the FBI, thank you for organizing this. Thank you to Tam and everyone at Rice University for having us here. And I'm happy to see that this is going to spread elsewhere, right, into other locations. I think it's important to hear what the community has to say, and that's what we want to do. And in a world where resources are thin, I don't have enough people to do everything that we're charged to do. We really have to prioritize what we do and how we do it. I think it's having these conversations is hugely important to inform that. And more importantly, I really just want to say that this is about, for me, it's about developing that level of trust with this community. And how we do that is relationship building and doing these kind of meetings, and whether it's me sitting here or whoever, that your folks feel comfortable coming to the FBI, because we want to help, just as Al put it, right? Whether it's civil rights, whether it's criminal program, whether it's national security, we're tasked to do all of that. We have the best people in the world that want to engage with you and everybody here in Houston to make Houston a better place. So thank you for being here, and I really look forward to developing our relationship in the future and really future meetings. So thank you. And thank you, Tam, in the back.
Thank you, Doug. And also, I think we want to send Rice to host this event, this wonderful event. And may I now ask Neal to give you a summary remark.
Podium. The reason I'm coming to the podium is because my leg went to sleep while I was sitting there. And I need to get some circulation back into it. I'm delighted to be here, but I was a little hesitant because when Stephen called me, he said, the FBI would like to talk with us. Well, I'm delighted, of course, that we had that opportunity. I've been to a lot of events here and on our campus and around the country and in Washington. This is a modest effort, It is a civil discourse, not a lot of that going on these days. It's an important event, and depending on what follows, what we've talked about today, the implementation steps, the progress we could make, could prove to be one of the most important events that's ever occurred on the Rice University campus. So I'm very appreciative for being a part of it. I want to thank Doug, certainly, Sterling, Gigi, all of you on the panel, and Joe Murphy for coming down to these tropical climes. I'm really hoping that on your next visit, we can get a little chill in the air, I think. Good communication between universities like ours and the FBI also is essential. I want to acknowledge everybody who is working together to try to make this happen. This means a lot to me. Personally, I have connections with the Asian community and with Asians in general. My thesis advisor, when I was getting my Ph.D., Chinese gentleman, born in Canton. When he was a kid, he was running away from the Japanese, and he was running away from the communists. He was running away from divisions within the National Party. He's one of my great mentor, made my career possible. He's one of the finest patriotic Americans I've ever had the privilege to know. And I know everybody agrees. It's not about individual people. It's been said many times. We just need to make sure that in everything we do, in all our various roles, that we keep that paramount in our minds. So turning to today's dialogue, just comments on what we've heard. Of course, there's concern from the Asian community about the negative impact that policies intended to protect the United States and its science and technology enterprise have had on Asians and Asian Americans, particularly those from China. The impact of research security policies at both the micro and the macro levels need to be studied, in my view, and they need to be determined scientifically. These issues are not understood. First of all, we don't have details in policies that we need to have. The White House is slow, OSTP is slow in getting out its guidelines, for example. Why is it slow? Not because they're not working day and night. I know that's not the case. It's because it's difficult. The problem is complicated. And like with many complicated problems, they need to be approached systematically and through civil discourse where you can have it, and also through just good, hard research. National Science Foundation has a program, I think encouraged by Congress, if I'm not mistaken, but you like those words, encouraged by Congress? Yeah, I've said that a lot in my career. Encouraged by Congress to find out what research security is all about. Do the science of research security. Find out what questions need to be asked and decide how to answer them. It'll take a while, but it's an important effort, and I certainly applaud it. Can the National Science Technology Council play a role? It is managed by OSTP, but it is a government organization at the cabinet level, including heads of various research agencies. As I recall, I think law enforcement, certainly law investigation, has participation on the committees of that council. It's new as things go in the federal government, but I think it can do more, and OSTP can do more. They're working very hard. It's an exhausting role they have, because they're the only place in the federal government with a staff of 120 maybe, just down the hall, or maybe on a different floor now, from the National Security Council. They're ideally placed to deal with some of these issues, because they're really the only place in the government that by statute are required to pay attention to the health of science and technology enterprise across the whole United States and give advice to the president, which means anybody around the president who might want to know. We heard frank and very frank, I would say, and very constructive conversations between the FBI and the members of the Asian community, which reinforces our belief, our understanding, that the FBI remains steadfast in its mission to protect the freedom of all individuals, not just citizens. Research security for the protection of U.S. interests needs to be focused on the behavior of needs to be focused on the behavior of individuals, what they have done or not done, not on their ethnicity, their country of origin. Guilt by association is not the right way. It's never been the right way in our country. So one final point I'd like to iterate and maybe stress is the importance of ongoing communication between the FBI and the Asian community. We need to remember to continue to talk with each other rather than talking about each other. Having this dialogue today puts us, I think, on the right path. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for all the people here, as well as those online who are still with us. And I was hoping we can finish the whole thing in 1.5 hours, but we used up the whole 2 hours. So thanks to everyone for participating. Thank you.